Today on America's Test Kitchen, Bridget prepares rigatoni with beef and onion ragu. Adam reviews colanders. Jack has Chris tasting white beans. And Julia cooks pasta with pesto. Right here on America's Test Kitchen.
Now, Bridget, I know you love it when I talk about my vacations.
I can't wait to hear about all the things you did.
A couple years ago in March, I took 3 of my kids to the Campania area of Italy, around Naples. And one day in Amalfi, we had pasta genovese, which is, as you well know, an onion sauce that actually had what looked like sliced pot roast in it. It was fabulous. I never had it before. So I said, hey, let's make it here in the test kitchen, because I think it's one of those great pasta dishes that very few people know about. But there are a lot of tricks to it.
There are a lot of tricks to it, yeah. I mean, starting off with the most authentic way to make it, where you take lots and lots of water and you use that to simmer beef, usually beef round. And you simmer the beef round with a lot of onions, often 2 to 3 times the onions per beef. And you reduce down that oniony sauce to toss with pasta. Well, we found out a few problems with that recipe. One, it wasn't beefy enough for us. We actually wanted more flavor than the round could afford to us. And there was a huge amount of liquid that we had to reduce down in order to dress pasta. So what do we end up with? A chuck eye roast. Has an amazing amount of fat and marbling. The longer you cook it, the better it gets. This is a 1-pound chuck eye roast. We could cook it like this, but that would take about 3.5 hours. So we're going to speed up the cooking here. And I'll cut this into quadrants, just lengthwise, and then right across. And each of these little mini roasts are now going to cook at a much faster rate. But some of these pieces, you'll notice, have really hard fat in there. And we do want to get rid of the hard fat. So by cutting this into smaller pieces, it's pretty darn easy for me to get in there with a knife and just cut away any of these big pieces of fat. All right, this is a teaspoon of kosher salt. Just want to make sure that it's well seasoned on all sides. And a half a teaspoon of black pepper. We're going to use the food processor to chop up all of our vegetables and other ingredients. So first thing that's going to go in is pancetta, 2 ounces, along with 2 ounces of salami. And now we are going to process this until it forms a smooth paste, and that'll take about 30 seconds. All right, now next in, 1 carrot cut into 1/2-inch pieces and 1 rib of celery also cut into 1/2-inch pieces. And we're also going to grind these with the meat ingredients that are in there so that they're really, really small. Another 30 seconds to do it. And we're going to put all of this paste right into our Dutch oven. There's no oil in here. The fat from the salami and the pancetta are going to start the cooking process. Chris, if you could turn the heat on. Medium heat is what I'm looking for here. And we're going to let that cook for about 5 minutes until the pancetta starts to look a little bit brown, and the salami as well. Last ingredient. White onions, yellow onions, you can use either of them. This is 2.5 pounds, and we've cut these into larger pieces. We're doing this in 2 batches. If we put all this in, the onions wouldn't really chop evenly. 8 to 10 pushes should do it. And I'll continue with the second batch of onions, and we'll go ahead and wait for that pancetta to fully render and start to brown. That smells so good already. Now we're going to add a little bit of tomato paste, 2 tablespoons. Traditionally, this particular dish is all based on beef and onion. We're going to cook this for about 90 seconds. And by cooking it, we're deepening the flavor. It's going to taste less like tomato, more beefy. All right, now we're going to add 2 cups of water and start scraping up all those browned bits. And we want to incorporate all that into the sauce. All right. Now, in go all those onions. Okay, so Chris, we need to bring this up to the boil. And remember before I mentioned that a lot of authentic recipes would use 6 cups or more of water. We thought that the onions made with all that water tasted really beefy, but it took so long to reduce the sauce for the pasta. So we thought, well, let's just cut out the water completely. Less water, more concentrated flavor. But there was a huge problem with it. There was less beef flavor in the onions. We were wondering why, but as it turns out, water is a key component to drawing out the beefy flavor of onions. Now we're going to add a little bit of dry white wine. This is a 1/2 cup. And a tablespoon of chopped marjoram. You can also use fresh oregano, but marjoram is a little bit more traditional for this. It's not used enough in cooking, I think. I love the flavor of marjoram. And now I'll go ahead and place the beef right in there. Just nestle it in here. Oh, I know. Is right. All right, so now that this is at a good simmer, we're going to take this over to the oven, and we're not going to cover it up. We're actually going to cook it in a 300-degree oven for about 2.5 hours.
Okay.
All right, ready for the big reveal? Ta-da! I know, smell that? Oh my gosh, it's incredible. But the beef is done cooking. Oh my gosh, it's so tender. It's fall apart. I am going to transfer the beef to a carving board here. See, they are like little mini pot roasts.
They shrank.
They did. And now, what's left in the pot, I do want to reduce down, but since we let the lid off before we put the pot into the oven, it's not going to take that long. So a good 10 minutes over medium heat should do it. And in the meantime, I'm going to take 2 forks and eat all this meat. No, I'm going to shred it into bite-sized pieces. All right, so while I'm working on this beef, I think you have some pasta to cook.
Okay. 4 quarts of boiling water. We put in 2 tablespoons of kosher salt, a pound of rigatoni, and we're going to cook it till it's just al dente. We'll check it after 6 or 7 minutes.
All right, Chris, the sauce is reduced. We can see the bottom of the pot, so most of that moisture has evaporated. This is a ½ cup of dry white wine, and we're adding it right at the end of cooking to preserve its fresher flavor. And it only needs to cook for about a minute or 2. But
okay.
In the meantime, I think the pasta's probably ready to drain. All right, we're going to put the beef back in, that shredded, beautiful beef, and another hit of fresh herbs. It's another tablespoon of marjoram. Give it a good stir. Last ingredient, I'm going to reduce the heat to low, and I'll add in a ½ cup of Pecorino Romano cheese. And Chris, if you could put the pasta right in there as well. Thank you so much. And we want to stir this just for another minute or so. What I'm doing is I'm releasing the starch from the pasta itself. So we're going to get this really kind of emulsive sauce that's going to cling to the pasta. All right, Chris, doesn't that look good? More pecorino for serving, of course.
Thank you.
My goodness. Be sure to get that meat.
Wow.
And you get that sweetness, you're right, from the onions, but they're really beefy.
Excellent. So for a great, authentic pasta genovese, which we call rigatoni with beef and onion ragu, mince the onions in the food processor to get them really fine to release all those delicious beefy compounds. Of course, it didn't hurt there was some pancetta and salami along the way. It was cooked for about 2.5 hours with a pound of chuck, took the meat out, reduced that sauce down, and finished it with a little bit of white wine. So there you have it from America's Test Kitchen, your kitchen. An excellent recipe for rigatoni with beef and onion ragu. Excellent. I have only a few hard and fast rules in home cooking. One of them is always to use dried beans over canned beans. But recently here in the kitchen, we found that canned beans may not be quite so bad.
Yeah, I've got to say, this one really shocked me, Chris. I was pretty confident when we started this that we were going to prove the case that it's worth taking the time to cook dried beans. After 9 rounds of tests, we proved that you should just buy canned beans. We kept on wanting to unprove it, but every time we did this, the canned beans won out over the dried beans, which was really kind of a shock. Some of the canned beans were mushy and tinny like I had sort of expected, but some of them were fabulous. And the dried beans were really inconsistent. And the more we did the research, we realized that the technology around canned beans has really improved, and the technology around dried beans there is no technology. And they basically
Dried beans.
Yeah, well, the canned beans go through high-tech processing, including optical scanners that blow out any beans that have hairline cracks from the processing line so they don't end up in the can. Dried beans, they basically take them out of the plant. They can't even wash them because if they wash them, that'll encourage rot. They throw them in a bag, and then they sit in harsh conditions in bad supermarkets for a very long time. So with the exception of one of the mail-order dried beans, all of the brands that we tested, they were old. They were too dry. The moisture content was below 10%, meaning that there was no chance of cooking them properly. You've been tasting 3 samples. Anything you're noticing? Any comments about these samples?
Yes, I have a definitive opinion.
Okay.
I definitely preferred this. This had more sodium in it, more flavor. They were creamy. This one was inconsistent, kind of mealy. These might have been dried. These also feel like canned beans, but mushy and tasteless. So for me, there was a clear winner, which was this. I would say this may have been dried beans, and this was just bad canned beans.
Okay. Well, I have some good news for you. Where would you like to start, Chris?
The fact that I picked the winner.
You picked the winner.
Right.
This is our favorite, canned or dried. The Goya beans we thought were basically
good.
perfect. And
They're creamy, which you don't get with dried beans.
why don't you start down one closest to me?
And I thought this was dried.
These are the Goya, and these were our least favorite of the dried beans.
they were
And the
not-
interesting thing, when we talk to Goya, they're starting with the same beans. And so what's in the can is what's in the bag, but what's in the can they were able to control and produce basically a perfect bean.
Okay, and this one was, another canned bean?
They don't add salt, they don't add
Yeah.
calcium to it so you don't get the firming, and they're kind of mushy and tinny and don't have a lot of flavor. And so you can buy a bad canned bean, which is why I threw that in there, but you can buy a great canned bean too.
So you've completely changed my life. My world is different now. Canned beans are better than dried beans, and go out and buy Goya cannellini beans. They actually have great flavor, and they're super creamy. So before we get started with our pasta dish from Liguria, I have a question, which is Liguria, northwest corner of Italy, seacoast. You think it would be all about the fish. But a lot of their dishes have to do with things nothing to do with the sea. They're sick of fish.
Yeah, right.
They get off the boat, we don't want fish. So they're famous for pesto. And this is an interesting dish because it's got pesto, but it's got pasta and potatoes and green beans. So potatoes and pasta, which sounds like an odd combination, but actually is a wonderful combination, especially if you get a nice sauce with those potatoes.
That's right, yeah, combination that works. So this is the traditional pasta with pesto, as you mentioned, and we're going to start by making some of the pesto ingredients. We're going to toast a 1/4 cup of pine nuts and 3 cloves of garlic. We always toast nuts before grinding them into a sauce or using them because it really brings out their flavor. And toasting the garlic in a dry pan also tempers its harsh bite. And the thing about pine nuts is somehow I always manage to burn them.
If you look 5 seconds in the other direction, they're burned.
That's the
Yes.
problem. So keep shaking them every once in a while.
Oh, so it's my fault.
Yes. While that toasts, we're going to turn our attention to the potatoes. And obviously, we tested different kinds of potatoes in this dish. And what we found we liked are the red potatoes because they're less starchy. So we're just going to peel a pound of red potatoes. You know, very often we like the little red potatoes because they cook through nice and evenly and they're easy to prep. But in this case, go for the big guys because they're easier to cut into uniform pieces. And now we'll want to cut them again into 1/2-inch pieces. All right, so again, that's a pound of potatoes. Is that done?
It's done. You were talking. I gave it over to you. I just want to make sure that everything
I
was
appreciate
okay.
that. Here, I'm going to put this down so you don't burn me. Nice job. Perfectly toasted. So when you think about this dish, again, there are 4 components. There's the pesto, the pasta, the potatoes, and the green beans. And a lot of recipes try to minimize the amount of pots and just cook it all together by staggering them into the pot according to their cooking times. But we found that was really hard to nail every time because depending on how fresh the green beans are or how fresh the potatoes are, they could have different cooking times. So here I have 3 quarts of boiling water. This is a tablespoon of table salt. And now we're going to add the potatoes. And we're going to cook them till they're tender, and that'll take about 10 minutes. While those potatoes cook, we're going to cook the green beans. So we're going to add 1/2 cup of water and a little bit of salt. This is a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And now this recipe uses 12 ounces of green beans. All right, so you're just going to stir these in quickly and then cover the skillet and let them cook for about 5 minutes.
Now, one of the secrets to the dish is a really silky sauce and smooth potatoes because it's really key to the pasta and potato combination. So we did a little research about the science of potatoes. Well, you could use russets or the red bliss we're using here. Russets have a lot of starch. They're called high-starch potatoes. That means the cells contain a lot of starch granules which swell up to 4 or 5 times